Despite David behaving wisely in all his actions, or perhaps because of David behaving wisely, Saul became more determined than ever to kill David. Remember, Saul had sworn by the Lord in an oath to Jonathan that David would not be killed. However, when David was too successful in battle against the Philistines, Saul sent his servants to kill David. When that was not successful, he set out to kill David himself. The Lord thwarted Saul by causing Saul and his servants to be enthralled by a spirit so that they prophesied. Unfortunately, this did not deter Saul from seeking to kill David. As we pick up the account, David once more flees from Saul. This time he seeks help from Jonathan, who at first cannot believe that his father had broken his oath not to kill David. David, who had always behaved wisely, ends up seeking refuge among the enemies of Israel. It is during this time that David writes two significant psalms of how God was with him, even though he had to flee from Saul and his countrymen. I'm Brenda Cathcart, and this is the Promise of Rest. As we progress through this chapter of David's life, note the similarities to the life of Joseph. Joseph and David were both singled out from their brothers, Joseph through his dreams and David through being anointed by Samuel. Both were hated because of being singled out, Joseph by his brothers and David by Saul. Joseph's brothers tried to kill Joseph, and Saul tried repeatedly to kill David. Both situations ended in a type of exile. Joseph was sold into slavery and ended up in Egypt, while David flees into exile, seeking refuge among the Philistines. Ironically, David's enemies Saul and Joseph were both from the tribe of Benjamin, while Joseph's chief enemy Judah and David were both from the tribe of Judah. Finally, both Joseph and David learned to trust God through the adversity they experienced while in exile. Although the Jewish sages look at the suffering of Joseph as a type of Messiah ben Joseph, the suffering servant, David also suffered before he became king of Israel. In this part of the account of the suffering of David, David had found refuge with Samuel in Ramah. Unfortunately, this was only a temporary solution. David still had his responsibilities as a leader over the men of war. He held this responsibility alongside Saul's cousin Abner. Further, Saul's attempts on David's life could have been attributed to fits of insanity when Saul was under the influence of the distressing spirit. So when Saul caught up with David in Ramah, and while God held Saul in thrall, David fled back to Gibeah, the capital city of Israel under King Saul. When he arrived, he sought the help of his good friend, Saul's son, Jonathan. 1 Samuel 20, 1 and 2. Then David fled from Naoth in Ramah and went and said to Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" So Jonathan said to him, "By no means, you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing either great or small without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so." This opening exchange of greetings has the possibility of causing a break in the relationship between David and Jonathan. David assumes Jonathan knew about this new attempt by Saul to kill him. Jonathan cannot believe that his father would have broken the oath that he had sworn that he would not kill David. Jonathan is caught between his loyalty to his father and his love for David. By all accounts, Jonathan had a close relationship with his father. Even David, when he wrote a song in tribute of Saul and Jonathan after their deaths in battle, extolled the closeness of their relationship. 2 Samuel 1:23. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. When David realized that Jonathan knew nothing about Saul's plans to kill him, he offered the explanation that Saul kept it from Jonathan to spare Jonathan grief. 1 Samuel 20, 3 and 4. Then David took an oath again and said, "Your father certainly knows that I have found favor in your eyes, and he has said, 'Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved.' But truly, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." So Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you yourself desire, I will do it for you." Jonathan showed that he was willing to find out whether Saul really intended to kill David. They devised a plan where Jonathan would provoke Saul to reveal his intentions toward David. It seems that Saul held a banquet in honor of the new moon each month. Saul's honored guests included his son Jonathan and his generals David and Abner. David would fail to show up for the banquet, and Jonathan would gauge Saul's response to his absence. 1 Samuel 20:5 and 6. And David said to Jonathan, "Indeed, tomorrow is the new moon, and I should not fail to sit with the king to eat. But let me go, that I may hide in the field until the third day at evening. If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked permission of me that he might run over to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the family.'" There is a hint that this is a special new moon celebration because David refers to a yearly sacrifice practiced by his family at this time. It is possible that this new moon celebration was the one at the 7th month, which is also the Feast of Trumpets. Hasidic Judaism associates David with the moon. The Art Scroll commentary on 1 Samuel explains, David is symbolized by the moon in Rosh Chodesh, the new moon, which is why the verse, "David, king of Israel, is alive and enduring," is included in Kiddush Levanah, the sanctification of the moon. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, so David had his moments of ascendancy and his times of travail. David's reign, along with his son Solomon's reign, are also associated with the full moon. There are 15 generations of Israel from Abraham to Solomon, beginning with Abraham as the light of revelation enters the world through God's promise to Abraham. David is the 14th generation as the kingdom is established. As Solomon ascended to the throne, the light had fully come to the world. Since the actual length of the lunar cycle is 29 and a half days long, the full light falls between the reigns of David and Solomon, with the plans for the temple given to David and being built by Solomon. In the conversation between David and Jonathan, David then invokes the covenant that Jonathan had made with him, citing the covenant responsibility to protect him from harm, even from harm from Jonathan's own father. 1 Samuel 20:8 and 9. "Therefore you shall deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant of the Lord with you. Nevertheless, if there is iniquity in me, kill me yourself, for why should you bring me to your father?" But Jonathan said, "Far be it from you, for if I knew certainly that evil was determined by my father to come upon you, then would I not tell you." After setting up a test to determine Saul's intent towards David and a means of communication, Jonathan counters by reminding David of his own responsibility to their covenant. If Saul did intend harm to David, this would put Jonathan, as the son of Saul, in a precarious position. Jonathan reminded David that he had a responsibility to protect Jonathan and Jonathan's family. 1 Samuel 20:14 through 17. "And you shall not only show me the kindness of the Lord while I still live, that I may not die, but you shall not cut off your kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord has cut off every one of the enemies of David from the face of the earth." So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "Let the Lord require it at the hand of David's enemies." Now Jonathan again caused David to vow, because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. The words kindly and kindness in these two passages are both from the Hebrew word chesed, number 2617 in Strong's Concordance, meaning kindness, favor, or mercy. The usage of the word chesed implies devotion to the covenant. The NKJV Study Bible comments, Jonathan used the same Hebrew word meaning covenant loyalty that David used earlier, verse 8. Both Jonathan and David were appealing to their covenant of friendship as a basis for acts of kindness. The next day at the feast of the new moon, Saul noticed that David was missing and attributed it to the possibility that David had become unclean and had thus excused himself from the celebration. It seems that Saul expected David to carry on as if Saul had not tried to kill him just days earlier. 1 Samuel 20:25 and 26. Now the king sat on his seat, as at other times, on a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He is unclean. Surely he is unclean. On the second night of the celebration, when David was again missing, Saul questioned Jonathan about David's absence. 1 Samuel 20:27. And it happened the next day, the second day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan his son, "Why has the son of Jesse not come to eat, either yesterday or today?" Notice that Saul didn't use David's name. He simply referred to him as the son of Jesse. This is the way that David first introduced himself to Saul in 1 Samuel 17:58 after he killed Goliath. Saul now uses it as a derogatory term and a means to separate himself from David. The Zondervan NIV Study Bible states that son of Jesse is a contemptuous way of referring to David. In response to Saul's question, Jonathan related the story that he and David had agreed on. Saul immediately became angry and turned his anger on his son. 1 Samuel 20:30 and 31. Then Saul's anger was aroused against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, you shall not be established, nor your kingdom. Now therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Saul made his intentions clear. He accused Jonathan of not valuing all that he had done to preserve the kingship for Jonathan to inherit. Jonathan's choice to protect David was to Saul as if Jonathan was not really Saul's son at all. It was now clear to Jonathan that Saul's attempts to kill David were not done in a fit of madness under the influence of the evil spirit. They were done by premeditation to preserve the kingship for Jonathan. Jonathan pushed Saul for an explanation of what David had done to deserve death. This further enraged Saul, and he attacked Jonathan in the same way he had originally attacked David, by throwing a spear at him. 1 Samuel 20:33 and 34. Then Saul cast a spear at him to kill him, by which Jonathan knew that it was determined by his father to kill David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had treated him shamefully. Jonathan carries out his and David's plan the next day by sending the message that Saul did intend to kill David. After a tearful farewell, David and Jonathan parted. We have no record of David and Jonathan directly interacting after this. 1 Samuel 20:42. Then Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, since we have both sworn in the name of the Lord, saying, 'May the Lord be between you and me, and between your descendants and my descendants forever.' So he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city." So David left Gibeah, but what plan did he have for where he would go? It doesn't appear that he had made any provision for his travels. This seems odd, since in his role of general of the armies, he would have to have considered supplies for his troops. David quickly headed south out of Gibeah and stopped at Nob, where the tabernacle resided. Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown comment on David's purpose in stopping at Nob. His object in fleeing to this place was partly for the supply of his necessities, and partly for comfort and counsel in the prospect of leaving the kingdom. When David arrived in Nob, he excused his presence as being on a secret mission for King Saul. This lie would set in motion the events that would end up in Ahimelech and the other priests' deaths at Nob. When David later heard of this result, he acknowledged his guilt to Abiathar, Ahimelech's son. 1 Samuel 22:22. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. After excusing his presence to Ahimelech, David asked for food for his journey. 1 Samuel 21, 3-6. Now therefore, what have you on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or whatever can be found. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have at least kept themselves from women. Then David answered the priest and said to him, Truly women have been kept from us about 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in effect common, even though it was sanctified in the vessel this day. So the priest gave him holy bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread which had been taken from before the Lord, in order to put hot bread in its place on the day when it was taken away. The only food available other than the showbread was food that had been given to the priests as part of the teruma offering of bread, which was holy to the Lord, as described in Numbers chapter 18. Only members of the priest families who were ritually clean could eat of the teruma offering. However, the showbread had been replaced that day, and David argued that the loaves of showbread that were replaced would be acceptable for him and his men to eat. He argued that the young men who accompanied him were like holy vessels and thus could eat the bread. Yeshua recorded that David's need for bread was greater than the restriction of who could eat the showbread. Finally, David asked if the priest had any weapons that he could take with him. Ironically, the only weapon they had was Goliath's sword, which David had taken as spoils after he killed Goliath. So as David headed to Goliath's hometown of Gath, he carried Goliath's own sword, where he was, not surprisingly, greeted with suspicion. 1 Samuel 21, 10-12. Then David arose and fled that day from before Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And the servants of Achish said to him, Is this not David, the king of the land? Did they not sing of him to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? Now David took these words to heart, and was very much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. The Philistines treated David as if they had captured the de facto king of Israel. David recognized that he was in danger. During this time in Gath, David wrote Psalm 56 about this captivity. In this psalm, he cries out to God for deliverance from his enemies. The psalm is in the form of 2 parallel chiasms with the same central theme. In the first chiasm, the outer layer is the threat of David's enemies in verses 1-3 and 5-7. The center is David's declaration of trust in the Lord. Psalm 56, 3-4. Whenever I am afraid, I will trust in you. In God, I will praise his word. In God, I have put my trust. I will not fear. What can flesh do to me? In the second chiasm, the outer layer is God's care for David and the defeat of David's enemies. The central theme is, once more, David's trust in the Lord, as evidenced by the repeated phrase, I will praise his word. Psalm 56, 10 and 11. In God I will praise his word. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God I have put my trust. I will not be afraid. What can man do to me? David did exactly what he said in this psalm. He trusted in God for deliverance. Psalm 34, which David also wrote in praise of God about this event, states that David sought wisdom from the Lord, and the Lord delivered David. Psalm 34, 6. This poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his troubles. While held captive by the Philistines in Gath, David pretended that he suffered from madness. 1 Samuel 21, 13-15. So he changed his behavior before them, feigned madness in their hands, scratched on the doors of the gate, and let his saliva fall down on his beard. Then Achish said to his servants, Look, you see the man is insane. Why have you brought him to me? Have I need of madmen that you have brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? It is ironic that while David pretended madness, Saul actually suffered from madness. David used his pretense to bring about his deliverance, while Saul used his madness to try to kill David, God's anointed king after Saul. The Art Scroll commentary on 1 Samuel describes the effect David's ruse had on Achish. Either his behavior convinced Achish that this madman could not be the David who was famed for his wisdom and tactical shrewdness, or he decided that David had gone mad, and there was no point in killing him or even allowing him to remain on the premises, so they drove David away. David's opening words of Psalm 34, which we would call the title, state that God delivered David by having Achish drive him away. Psalm 34, 1a. A psalm of David when he pretended madness before Abimelech, who drove him away, and he departed. Although God delivered David from the Philistines, David still had no place where he could be safe from Saul. David tried seeking refuge with Samuel, Jonathan, and the Philistines. None of these places offered him the refuge he sought. However, as David's Psalms reveal, David found refuge in the Lord. In the meantime, Saul continued to wage his campaign to kill the hated and feared son of Jesse. I'm Brenda Cathcart for Moed Ministries International. Shalom and be blessed.